They tell me I went down hard enough to crack a floor tile, though I don't remember the floor. I remember the bell over the door, still ringing, tinny and far off, like it was ringing for somebody else's store. I remember Nadia Sorensen's voice before I remember her face. Sharp, clipped, the voice of a woman used to being heard the first time she says a thing. Mr. Renner. Mr. Renner, can you hear me? She'd come in 20 minutes earlier with a leather folder under her arm and her sunglasses pushed up in a hair the color of wet sand, set the folder on my counter without asking, and told me, not unkindly, that Heliarch Renewable Partners needed my signature by Friday, or the panel array got redrawn around my 4 acres instead of through them. 4 acres of flat scrub that hadn't grown a thing since the Eisenhower administration, she said, like she was doing me a favor by being honest about how little she thought it was worth to anybody but her. I told her I needed the day to think, which was true, and which she took for stalling, which it also was a little. While she waited on my answer, I rang up Dale Pruitt's propane delivery and told him to take the extra case of water in the cooler, no charge, since his transmission had finally quit on him out past the wash, and his wife was 8 months along and shouldn't be hauling jugs in this heat. Nadia watched the whole exchange without a word. The way you watch something you've decided doesn't apply to the figures in your folder. I was still thinking over her offer and reaching for the coffee pot out of habit more than thirst, when my knees went out from under me like the floor had been pulled sideways. Why no after that? I know because people told me. Bertie Calhoun, who runs the laundromat 2 doors down and has known me since we were both young enough to think Quail Springs was going somewhere, heard the crash and came running in her bare feet. She says Nadia was already on the floor beside me, 2 fingers on my neck, barking the address in her phone like she did it every day of her life. Funny thing to learn about a person, that under the leather folder and the clipped voice, she didn't hesitate for 1 second. Bertie's the one who's kept half an eye on me since Faye died, 6 years back now, the way good neighbors do, without ever calling it that. She'll tell you she just likes my coffee. I let her believe it. The ambulance took 40 minutes to come from Cedar Junction, the only town near enough to bother having one. Ivy was in school. Bertie's husband Hank drove the 11 miles to get her himself rather than let her hear it secondhand from another kid. And he told her plain, the way I'd have wanted, your dad's at the clinic, he's going to be fine, and you don't have to be brave about it. You just have to come with me. She's 9. She didn't cry until she saw me. And then she didn't cry long because that's not really her nature, and because I made a point, as soon as I could talk, of telling her it was just my heart skipping a beat it had no business skipping, which was true enough. A small stroke, the doctor said. Caught early. A warning, not a verdict. What none of us caught, none of us could have, was the storm building over the Pinto Range while the ambulance was still rolling. Flash flood, the kind the desert keeps a secret until it isn't one anymore. By the time Ivy and Hank reached the clinic, Route 9, the only paved road in or out of Quail Springs, was already 4 feet underwater at the wash crossing, and it would stay that way until morning, which meant Nadia Sorensen, who had a flight out of Cedar Junction booked for 6 the next evening and a closing she needed my signature for, was stuck in my town with nowhere to go but the store she'd come by. She told me later she figured she'd sit in her rental car at the edge of the lot until the water dropped, work on her laptop, eat the protein bar she keeps in her bag for exactly this kind of inconvenience. That lasted about an hour. Then Bertie showed up at her window with a thermos of coffee and a plate of cornbread and said, in the voice Bertie uses when she's not really asking, "You'll catch your death out here. Come sit where there's a roof." So she sat where there was a roof. Mine. The store stayed open because it always stays open. That's not bravery. It's just what you do in a town with 1 gas pump and 40 people who might need it after dark. And Hank propped the door and ran it for me while I was at the clinic, and one by one, without anybody calling a meeting about it, Quail Springs came through that door. Not for the gas. Sue Tilden brought a casserole dish she didn't ask for back. Pete Garay, 81 years old and proud of every one of them, sat at my counter for 2 hours just so somebody could tell him I was stable, because he'd lost his own wife to a hospital silence nobody warned him about, and he wasn't going to let that happen twice in one town. A boy named Dax, maybe 12, came and soaked to the knees from the wash and put 4 crumpled dollar bills on the counter for candy he'd already eaten on credit half a dozen times that summer because his mother had finally gotten her shift bonus and told him to square it. Old Lucille Marsh, who hasn't driven after dark in a decade, had her grandson bring her down anyway, sat herself on the bench out front, and told anybody who walked past that this store had carried her through 2 husbands and a hip replacement, and she'd be damned if she wasn't going to sit by it tonight. Hank's brother Cole, who I'd loaned the tire jack to in April and never once asked back, returned it that night, still smelling of the desert, set it quietly by the register, and left without making a thing of it. Nobody made a speech about any of it. They just came, did what needed doing, and left room for the next one. Nadia watched all of it from a stool at my counter with a coffee going cold in her hands. She told me afterwards she counted 11 people in 4 hours, in a town her own survey had logged at 31 residents, and not one of them was there because anybody asked them to be. Somewhere in the 3rd hour, restless, she went looking for a pen to finish a memo she had no real reason to finish that night, and she found, instead, the notebook I keep under the register. Marbled black and white cover, the kind you'd have used for school in 1981, because that's exactly what it was. My father started it the year he handed me the store. I kept it going every year since, in the same cramped hand, because somewhere in there it had stopped being his habit and become mine. It isn't an account book. There's no column for dollars. It's just names and dates and a line or two. Hank Calhoun, March, truck wouldn't start. Gave him a jump and let the fan belt go on the tab till the ranch sold its calves. Dax's mother, June, short on rent, took it out of the register and never told her. Pete A., the November his wife died, sat with him till midnight 3 nights running. Didn't charge for the coffee. Lucille M., the winter her hip went bad, drove her groceries up the road rather than make her ask twice. Cole Calhoun, '09, lent him the truck for the whole calving season, never once asked what it was costing me to be without it. 40 years of it, packed tight, page after page, no dollar figures, no thanks expected, because the whole point of writing a thing down like that is so you remember it happened, not so anybody else does. Nadia read for a long time. She told me later it was past 2 in the morning before she closed the cover, and that by then the rain had stopped and the wash had started to drop, and she could have gone back to her car, and she didn't. She said she kept doing the math without meaning to. 4 decades, hundreds of names, not one of them ever repaid in a way a ledger like hers would recognize. And that somewhere around page 60, she stopped doing the math and just read. What she said to me the morning I came home, and I want to get this right because it isn't the kind of thing a man forgets, was that she'd spent 6 years closing deals on land she'd flown over exactly once, looking for the smartest acre, the cheapest right-of-way, the fastest signature, and not once had she sat still long enough to find out what an acre actually held. I came here to buy 4 acres of flat ground, she said. I didn't know I was going to find out it had 40 years of people's whole lives written into it. She wasn't crying. She's not given to that any more than Ivy is. But she said it like a woman setting something down she'd been carrying wrong. I didn't make a speech back. I'm not built for them. And a man my age learns there's not much worth saying that a cup of coffee and a little patience won't say better. I told her the truth, which was that I'd never once thought of the notebook as anything but bookkeeping for a different kind of debt, the kind you can't really collect on, so you just keep the record straight in your own mind in case the day ever comes when you need to remember why you stayed somewhere instead of going. I told her, too, that a man gets a scare like the one I'd had, lying on his own floor with the bell still ringing, and it tends to clarify what he was keeping the record for in the first place. Faye used to say the whole town was just one long conversation nobody ever finished. I'd always thought that was a nice thing to say at a funeral. Lying on that floor, I understood it was just true. 9 days later, the papers came back from Heliarch's lawyers. And they weren't the papers Nadia had set on my counter the day I went down. The array would still go in on the other 3 acres. She hadn't lost her nerve for the deal, and I wouldn't have respected her half as much if she had. But my acre, the one with the pump and the porch and the bell over the door, was carved out clean, deeded back outright, with a clause she'd written herself that the lawyers tried twice to take out and twice she put back in. That as long as Otis Renner or anyone he names wants to keep the doors open, Heliarch will run a power line to it for free, because a town that size shouldn't have to choose between its only store in the future. She drove out herself to bring me the signed copy instead of mailing it, which she didn't have to do, and which told me more about her than the clause did. We sat at the counter where she'd read my father's handwriting at 2 in the morning, and I asked her, since she'd gone to the trouble, what the one condition was, because in my experience there's always one, and I'd rather hear it straight than find it buried in paragraph 9. The condition, she said, is that you let your daughter keep growing up somewhere people write things like that down about each other. That's not in the contract. I just wanted to say it out loud. Ivy was on the porch step when Nadia left, drawing the gas pumps in colored pencil the way she does most slow afternoons. Not because anybody told her to remember this place, but because 9 years old is young enough to love a thing without needing a reason yet. I sat down next to her, and she held up the drawing and asked me, the way she does, whether I thought the pumps would still be there when she was grown. I told her the truth. I told her I didn't know how long anything stays the way you found it. Not a town, not a body, not a man. I'd had nearly 70 years to learn that lesson, and it still caught me flat on a linoleum floor with no warning at all. But I told her some things get written down by people who never expect a reward for it, and those things have a way of outlasting the rest, whether anybody ever reads the page or not. Some debts, I told her, you don't collect on. You just carry them forward, one name at a time, until somebody younger picks up the pen. She seemed satisfied with that, went back to her colored pencils, and I sat a while longer on my own porch in the last of the light, listening to the bell go quiet over a door that for one more season at least was staying open.